Only the human escaped the Kraken, rescuing two stunning alien girls along the way. Sergeant Jack Robbins stood at the edge of his small fishing boat, strong hands gripping the railing as he looked out over the vast turquoise sea. The twin suns of Aquarius 6 beat down on his tanned, muscular shoulders. He ran a hand through his short brown hair, feeling the light stubble on his chiseled jaw. Another peaceful day on this water-covered planet, far from the wars and chaos that had defined most of his adult life. Jack had retired here a year ago, seeking solace after 15 years in the Terran Defense Force. He'd seen and done things no man should have to. Now he just wanted a quiet, simple life, fishing, exploring the scattered islands, and forgetting the past. But some things were not so easily escaped. As if to remind him of this fact, a shrill scream suddenly pierced the salty air. Jack snapped his head toward the sound, blue eyes narrowing. There, near the shore of one of the larger islands, he spotted two figures desperately swimming away from Kraken, Jack growled under his breath. The massive, tentacled beasts were the apex predators of Aquarius 6's oceans, and this one had found some prey, a pair of humanoid females, judging by their lithe forms and long flowing hair. For a moment, Jack hesitated. Getting between a hungry Kraken and its target was beyond foolish. He'd fought the creatures before and still bore the scars. The smart thing would be to turn his little boat around and motor off to safety. Someone else's problem. Then one of the women let out another terrified wail, and Jack felt something clench in his chest. Oh, hell, he never could resist a damsel in distress. Or two, muttering a string of curses, he fired up the engine and gunned it toward the chaos. As he drew closer, details came into focus. The women were strikingly beautiful, with sky blue skin, sapphire hair, and delicate features. Their clothing was minimal, strips of shimmery material that left little to the imagination. But their eyes were wide with fear as they thrashed and kicked against the inexorable pull of the Kraken's tentacles. "Hey, ugly!" Jack yelled as he brought the boat alongside the creature. "Pick on someone your own size." The beast's massive eyes swiveled toward him, glaring balefully. Then a tentacle lashed out, narrowly missing Jack's head. He ducked and grabbed the harpoon he kept for just such occasions. "That's right, eyes on me, you overgrown calamari," Jack taunted, keeping the creature focused on him as he maneuvered the boat between it and the women. "Ladies, grab on!" The blue-skinned beauties needed no further encouragement. They lunged for the side of Jack's boat, gripping it with slender fingers. Jack hauled them aboard with one powerful arm, the other still aiming the harpoon at the Kraken. "Hang on!" he barked as the creature roared in fury. Tentacles slapped the water, rocking the boat violently. Jack staggered but kept his feet. He sighted down the harpoon, aiming for the beast's giant eye. Thwack! The razor-tipped projectile found its mark, sinking deep. The Kraken shrieked, inky blood gushing from the wound. Its tentacles flailed in agony, but Jack was already spinning the wheel, pointing the boat toward open water. The engine roared as they surged forward, leaving the writhing creature behind. Jack didn't relax until the island was a distant smudge and the Kraken's screams had faded. Only then did he let out a breath and turn to his passengers. The two women were huddled together, trembling and wide-eyed. Up close, they were even more stunning, with full lips, high cheekbones, and lithe, curvaceous figures. Jack felt a stirring of interest that had nothing to do with the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. "You ladies all right?" he asked, voice gruff. They nodded mutely, staring at him as if he'd just descended from the heavens. Jack shifted, suddenly self-conscious. He was acutely aware of his bare chest, clad only in a pair of faded military cargos. "I'm Jack," he offered, extending a hand. "Jack Robbins." "I am Lixia," the taller of the women replied, placing her slender blue hand in his larger one. "And this is my sister, Neria." "You saved our lives, Jack Robbins. We are in your debt." Her voice was melodic, with an exotic accent that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. Neria, seeming to recover from her shock, moved forward and boldly pressed her lithe body against his. "Our hero?" she purred, sapphire eyes smoldering. "How can we ever repay you?" Jack swallowed hard, trying to ignore the sensation of her soft curves molding to his hard planes. "No need for that," he managed. "Just glad I could help." Lixia laid a gentle hand on his arm, her touch electric even through his weathered skin. Please, you must allow us to show our gratitude. It is our way. She gestured toward the island they had fled. Take us to our village. Our people will want to honor the brave warrior who rescued their daughters. Jack hesitated, instincts warring. He wasn't sure he wanted to be the center of attention, but the hopeful, admiring look in Lixia's eyes was hard to resist. Neria's lingering touches weren't helping his resolve either. All right, he relented. I'll take you home. The sisters' faces lit up with identical smiles, and Jack felt an answering grin tug at his mouth. Maybe playing the hero wasn't so bad after all. As the boat skimmed over the waves toward the island village, Jack couldn't help but wonder what he'd gotten himself into this time. Somehow he suspected his quiet retirement had just gotten a lot more interesting. The village was in an uproar by the time Jack's boat reached the shore. Word of the sisters' rescue had spread like wildfire, and it seemed the entire population had turned out to catch a glimpse of the hero who had saved their beloved daughters. As Jack helped Lixia and Neria out of the boat, he found himself surrounded by a sea of azure faces, all staring at him with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and gratitude. He shifted uncomfortably under the weight of their gazes, feeling like a zoo exhibit. Behold, Lixia announced to the crowd, her melodic voice ringing out. This is Jack Robbins, the brave warrior who rescued us from the Kraken's clutches. A cheer went up from the assembled villagers, along with a smattering of applause. Jack felt his face heat and rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. It was nothing, he mumbled, but his words were lost in the excited chatter. Suddenly the crowd parted and a tall, regal-looking male strode forward. He was older, with silver streaking his sapphire hair, and he wore an elaborate headdress adorned with shells and pearls. Jack guessed that this was the village chief. Welcome, Jack Robbins, the chief said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect. I am Chief Neptar. You have done us a great service by saving my daughters. We are forever in your debt. Jack blinked. Daughters? He glanced at Lixia and Neria, who smiled at him radiantly. No wonder the whole village had turned out. He'd rescued royalty. I just did what anyone would have done, Jack said with a shrug, but the chief shook his head. No, not anyone. You faced the Kraken in nothing but a wooden boat. No one has ever survived such an encounter, let alone triumphed. You must have very large bull's balls. Jack thought back to the desperate, adrenaline-fueled battle and privately disagreed. He'd gotten lucky, that's all, but he didn't argue, sensing it would be futile. Please, you must let us feast in your honor, Chief Neptar insisted. It is the least we can do. Jack hesitated, but Neria chose that moment to slip her hand into his, her slender fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. Please say you'll stay, she murmured, gazing up at him through thick lashes. We want to get to know our hero better. Lixia pressed against his other side, her soft curves molding to his muscular arm. Yes, do stay, Jack, just for a little while. Faced with the double assault of the sisters' persuasive charms, Jack found his resistance crumbling. All right, he agreed. I suppose I can stick around for a bit. The chief clapped his hands in delight. Excellent! We shall prepare a feast the likes of which you've never seen. With that, he barked orders to the villagers, who scurried off to begin the preparations. In a whirlwind of activity, Jack found himself swept along by Lixia and Neria, who insisted on giving him a tour of the village. As they walked, Jack couldn't help but notice the admiring glances and whispers that followed in their wake. The villagers seemed fascinated by him, pointing and murmuring behind their hands. Why are they all staring at me? He asked, feeling self-conscious. Lixia giggled. They've never seen a human before. You're quite the exotic specimen. And they're impressed by your bravery, Neria added, squeezing his hand. Facing a Kraken in a wooden boat? You must have balls the size of boulders. Jack nearly choked on his own spit. He wasn't used to such bold talk from women, especially not drop-dead gorgeous alien princesses. But he had to admit, he kind of liked it. The tour ended at a large open-air pavilion in the center of the village. Long tables had been set up, groaning under the weight of all manner of strange and colorful dishes. The mouth-watering aroma made Jack's stomach growl. Chief Neptar greeted them, resplendent in an even more elaborate headdress. He gestured for Jack to take the seat of honor at the head of the table, with Lixia and Neria flanking him on either side. As soon as they were seated, the chief raised his hands and the villagers fell silent. Friends, he boomed, we are gathered here to honor Jack Robbins, the brave human who saved my daughters from certain death. His courage and skill are unmatched, and we are forever in his debt." Cheers and applause rang out, making Jack duck his head in embarrassment. He still didn't feel like he'd done anything special. "In gratitude for his heroic deed," the chief continued, "I offer Jack the greatest gift our people can bestow." He paused dramatically. "The hands of my daughters in marriage." Jack's jaw dropped. Beside him, Lixia and Neria beamed, looking thrilled by this turn of events. The villagers went wild, hooting and hollering their approval. I don't know what to say," Jack stammered, his mind reeling. Marriage? To both of them? He'd never even considered, but the chief was already moving on, signaling for the feast to begin. Jack found himself swept up in the revelry, plied with exotic food and drink by the enthusiastic villagers. Lixia and Neria remained glued to his side, feeding him tidbits and gazing at him adoringly. As the night wore on and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Jack found himself growing more and more comfortable with the idea of staying on this planet with these people, with Lixia and Neria. They made him feel wanted, appreciated, in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe ever. Late into the evening, when the stars glittered overhead and the feast had wound down to a pleasant buzz of conversation and laughter, Lixia leaned in close, her breath tickling Jack's ear. "Come with us," she whispered, her sapphire eyes sparkling with mischief and promise. "We have something to show you." Intrigued, Jack allowed the sisters to lead him away from the pavilion, down a winding path toward the beach. They walked until the lights and noise of the village faded, until there was nothing but the soft susurration of the waves in the moonlight painting the sand silver. "What is this place?" Jack asked, looking around in wonder. "Our special spot," Neria replied, her voice husky. "We come here to be alone, to escape the pressures of being the chief's daughters." She stepped close to him, trailing a finger down his chest. "And now we want to share it with you." Jack's pulse kicked up a notch as Lixia pressed against his back, her lips grazing his neck. "We want to share everything with you, Jack," she murmured. The combination of their seductive touches and the romantic setting was intoxicating. Jack felt his body responding, desire kindling deep in his gut. But he hesitated, uncertain. "Are you sure about this?" he asked hoarsely. "You barely know me." "We know enough," Neria purred, her hands sliding lower. "We know you're brave and strong and kind. We know you risked your life to save ours." "And we know we want you," Lixia breathed, pressing her lush curves against him. "More than anything." Jack groaned as their questing hands found his most sensitive spots. His reservations melted away under the onslaught of their passion, replaced by a burning need. "Then I'm yours," he rasped, giving himself over to the moment, to them. "For as long as you'll have me." Under the light of the alien moons, on a secluded beach on a planet far from Earth, Jack surrendered to the love and desire of his beautiful rescues. Their bodies joined, their cries of pleasure mingling with the crashing of the waves as they celebrated life, connection, and the beginning of something wondrous. Jack awoke to the sensation of soft lips trailing kisses along his jawline. He blinked open his eyes, momentarily disoriented, before the events of the previous day came rushing back. The Kraken attack, the village celebration, the moonlit tryst on the beach. He turned his head and found himself gazing into Neria's luminous sapphire eyes. She smiled at him, her expression a mixture of tenderness and mischief. "Good morning, my brave warrior," she purred, snuggling closer to his side. On his other side, Lixia stirred, her silky blue hair tickling his chest as she propped herself up on one elbow. "I trust you slept well?" she asked, a teasing lilt to her voice. Jack chuckled, feeling a swell of male pride. "Best sleep of my life," he replied honestly. And it was true. Here, tangled up with these two incredible women, he felt more at peace than he had in years. The nightmares that usually plagued him, filled with the horrors of war and loss, had been kept at bay, replaced by dreams of passion and comfort. He could get used to this. As if sensing his thoughts, Lixia leaned in and brushed her lips against his. "We could stay here forever," she murmured. "Just the three of us in this little slice of paradise." It was a tempting thought, but Jack knew it was just a fantasy. He had responsibilities, a life back on his island, and as much as he was coming to care for Lixia and Neria, he barely knew them. Sensing his hesitation, Neria nuzzled his neck. "At least stay a little longer," she coaxed, Father will be expecting us to begin the wedding preparations." Jack's eyes widened. "Wedding preparations?" The sisters giggled at his startled expression. "Of course," Lixia said. "You didn't think Father's offer was just for show, did you?" Actually, that was exactly what Jack had thought. He'd assumed the chief's grand gesture had been just that, a gesture, a way to express his gratitude and save face in front of his people. He hadn't realized they were serious about the whole marriage thing. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his mind whirling. Marriage? To both of them? It was unheard of, impossible, wasn't it? But as he looked into their hopeful, adoring faces, he felt something inside him shift, a yearning long buried for connection, for family, for love. Could he really have that here with them? Before he could formulate a response, a shout rang out from the direction of the village. It was followed by another and another, the voices high and panicked. Jack was on his feet in an instant, years of training kicking in. "Something's wrong," he said tersely, already reaching for his discarded clothes. Lixia and Neria scrambled up as well, hastily donning their own garments. Their faces were tight with worry. "It sounds like it's coming from the village square," Lixia said, her voice trembling slightly. Jack took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Stay close to me," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Together they raced back up the path toward the village, the sisters' long hair streaming behind them. As they drew closer, the shouts grew louder, more frenzied. Jack could pick out snatches of words: attack, monsters, help. His blood ran cold. He knew those cries all too well. They were the same ones he'd heard on a dozen battlefields across the galaxy, the desperate pleas of the innocent in the face of unimaginable horror. He put on a burst of speed, outpacing the sisters as he charged into the village square, and froze, his heart seizing in his chest. Chaos reigned. Villagers ran in every direction, screaming as dark, writhing shapes pursued them. Jack blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The shapes were vaguely humanoid, but twisted, distorted. Their flesh was mottled gray and green, glistening with slime. Tentacles sprouted from their backs, whipping through the air with cruel precision. And their faces. Dear God, their faces. They were the stuff of nightmares, all gaping maws filled with jagged teeth and bulbous, pulsing eyes. Kraken spawn. Jack had heard the stories, whispered around campfires by grizzled old space marines. The Kraken were bad enough, but sometimes when the conditions were just right, they reproduced, laid their eggs in the shallows near unsuspecting settlements. And when those eggs hatched, he watched in horror as one of the creatures pounced on a fleeing villager, bearing him to the ground. The man's scream cut off abruptly as the thing's jaws closed around his throat, tearing, rending. Jack saw red. With a roar of pure fury, he charged forward, snatching up a discarded spear from the ground. He reached the creature just as it raised its head, the villager's blood dripping from its maw. It hissed at him, tentacles coiling, but Jack didn't hesitate. With a powerful thrust, he drove the spear straight through the thing's eye, feeling the crunch of bone and the hot gush of ichor over his hands. The creature shrieked, thrashing, but Jack held firm. He twisted the spear viciously, making sure the job was done before yanking it free. One down. But there were more, so many more. They swarmed the village, an unstoppable tide of horror. Jack fought like a man possessed, the spear a blur in his hands as he hacked and slashed. But for every one he felled, two more seemed to take its place. He caught glimpses of Lixia and Neria in the fray, using their own makeshift weapons to defend their people. Pride swelled in his chest at their bravery, even as fear for their safety threatened to choke him. A scream off to his left caught his attention. He whirled and saw Chief Neptar grappling with one of the larger spawn. The creature had him by the throat, its tentacles tightening, choking off his air. Jack leapt forward, but he was too far away. He watched in helpless rage as the chief's struggles grew weaker, his face turning a sickly shade of blue. Suddenly, a blur of motion caught his eye. Neria, her beautiful face contorted in a snarl of defiance, launched herself at the creature from behind. She buried a knife. Where had she gotten a knife? Into its back, over and over, heedless of its thrashing tentacles. The thing shrieked, dropping Neptar to claw at the source of its pain. But Neria was relentless, driving the blade in again and again until, with a final shudder, the creature collapsed. Jack reached them just as Neria dropped to her knees beside her father, cradling his head in her lap. Neptar coughed weakly, blood flecking his lips. "My daughter!" he rasped, his hand coming up to touch her cheek. "You saved me." Tears streamed down Neria's face. "I couldn't let it take you," she whispered. "I couldn't lose you, too." Jack's heart clenched. He knew that pain all too well, the agony of losing those you loved to the horrors of war. He knelt beside them, laying a gentle hand on Neria's shoulder. "He's going to be all right," he said softly, hoping it was true. "We'll get him to a healer." Neria nodded, sniffling. She looked up at Jack, her eyes shining with gratitude and something else, something deeper. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." Before Jack could respond, a shout rang out across the square. "They're retreating! The spawn are retreating!" Jack's head snapped up. Sure enough, the remaining creatures were scuttling away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had come. The villagers cheered, their voices ragged with relief and exhaustion. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in his gut. This was only the beginning, he knew. The Kraken spawn would be back, in greater numbers, and next time the village might not be so lucky. He looked down at Neria, at Lixia who had joined them, her own face streaked with blood and grime. His heart swelled with a fierce protectiveness, a determination to keep them safe, no matter the cost. He had found something worth fighting for, here on this alien world, and he would be damned if he let anything Kraken or spawn or otherwise take it from him. The village was in shambles, the once peaceful square, now a battlefield strewn with the bodies of the fallen. The survivors moved among the wreckage, tending to the wounded and mourning the dead. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the acrid stench of Kraken spawn ichor. Jack stood amidst the chaos, his heart heavy. They had won the battle, but at a terrible cost. So many lives lost, so much destruction. And for what? A temporary reprieve, a fleeting moment of safety before the next wave of horror crashed over them? No, he couldn't accept that, wouldn't accept it. There had to be a way to stop this, once and for all. As if sensing his thoughts, Lixia appeared at his side, her hand slipping into his. "We can't go on like this," she said softly, echoing his own feelings. "The spawn will keep coming until there's nothing left." Jack nodded grimly. "We need to find the source," he said. "Cut off the head of the snake." "But how?" Neria asked, joining them. Her face was drawn, exhaustion and grief etched into every line. "No one knows where the Kraken lay their eggs." "Someone must," Jack insisted. His mind raced, sifting through the stories and rumors he'd heard over the years. There are always tales, whispers of ancient ruins, hidden temples, places steeped in Kraken lore. Lixia's eyes widened. "The Temple of the Deep," she breathed. "Of course," Jack frowned. "The Temple of the Deep? An ancient site far out in the maw," Lixia explained. "It's said to be the place where the Kraken first rose from the depths. Eons ago." "The maw?" Jack asked, not liking the sound of that at all. Neria shuddered. "The most treacherous part of the ocean. Ships disappear there, never to be seen again. They say the water itself is alive, hungry." Jack's jaw tightened. It sounded like a suicide mission. But what choice did they have? If there was even a chance this temple held the key to stopping the Kraken and their spawn, they had to take it. "Then that's where we're going," he said decisively. Lixia and Neria exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Then, as one, they nodded. "We're with you," Lixia said, her voice ringing with determination. "To the end." Jack felt a swell of emotion, of gratitude and love and fierce protectiveness. These women, these incredible, brave women, were willing to follow him into the jaws of hell itself. He swore, in that moment, that he would do everything in his power to keep them safe, to be worthy of their trust and devotion. They spent the next few hours in a flurry of preparation, gathering supplies and saying their goodbyes. Chief Neptar, still recovering from his wounds, gave them his blessing, his eyes shining with pride as he looked upon his daughters. "You carry the hopes of our people," he told them solemnly. "May the ancestors watch over you and guide your path." With heavy hearts and steely resolve, Jack, Lixia, and Neria set out, their small boat cutting through the waves as they headed for the open ocean. They sailed for days, the sun and stars their only companions as they ventured into uncharted waters. As they drew closer to the maw, the sea began to change. The once clear blue waters turned dark and turbid, churning with an unnatural energy. Strange creatures could be glimpsed beneath the surface, their forms twisted and grotesque. "We're getting close," Lixia murmured, her eyes scanning the horizon. "I can feel it." Jack felt it too, a prickling sense of unease that crawled up his spine and set his teeth on edge. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to flee these cursed waters. But he pushed forward, his grip on the rudder unwavering. And then on the seventh day, they saw it. Rising from the depths like a jagged black tooth, the Temple of the Deep loomed before them. It was a massive structure, hewn from some dark, glistening stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. As they drew closer, Jack could make out intricate carvings etched into the temple's surface, depicting scenes of Kraken and their spawn, of hapless sailors being dragged down into the depths. It was a chilling sight, a reminder of the horrors they were about to face. They beached their boat on the narrow strip of land surrounding the temple, the black sand crunching beneath their feet as they disembarked. The air was thick and heavy, pressing down on them like a physical weight. "I don't like this," Neria whispered, her hand finding Jack's. "It feels wrong." Jack couldn't disagree. Every fiber of his being was screaming at him to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But he steeled himself, squaring his shoulders. "We don't have a choice," he said, his voice sounding oddly muffled in the oppressive atmosphere. "We have to see this through." Together they approached the temple entrance, a yawning archway that seemed to swallow the light. Strange symbols were carved around the edges, their meaning lost to time. As they stepped across the threshold, Jack felt a sudden, wrenching sense of disorientation. The world spun around him, his vision blurring and his stomach churning. He stumbled, nearly losing his footing on the slick stone floor. Beside him, Lixia and Neria cried out, their hands flying to their heads. "What's happening?" Neria gasped, her voice tight with pain. "I don't know," Jack gritted out, fighting to stay upright. "But we have to keep moving." Step by laborious step, they pressed on, deeper into the temple's dark heart. The corridors twisted and turned, seeming to shift and change when they weren't looking. More than once, Jack could have sworn they were walking in circles, passing the same grotesque statues and eerie carvings over and over. But just as despair began to set in, they emerged into a vast chamber, and there, in the center of the room, was a sight that made Jack's blood run cold. A massive altar, carved from the same dark stone as the rest of the temple, and on that altar, pulsing with a sickly green light. "Kraken eggs," Lixia breathed, her face pale. "Hundreds of them." Jack's mind raced. If even a fraction of these eggs hatched, it would mean the end of everything. The Kraken spawn would overrun the oceans, devouring everything in their path. No one would be safe. "We have to destroy them," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "It's the only way." But as he took a step forward, a chilling laugh echoed through the chamber. "Foolish land dwellers," a voice hissed, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You think you can stop the inevitable?" Jack whirled, his hand going to his weapon. There, emerging from the shadows, was a figure unlike any he had ever seen. It was vaguely humanoid, but its skin was a mottled gray, slick and shining in the eerie light. Tentacles sprouted from its back, writhing and coiling with a life of their own. But it was the face that truly horrified, a twisted mass of bulbous eyes and gaping, tooth-filled maws. "The Kraken Queen," Lixia gasped, her voice trembling. "But that's impossible. She's just a myth, a legend." The creature laughed again, the sound like nails on glass. "Oh, I assure you I am quite real," it purred. "And you, my little morsels, have made a grave mistake in coming here." With a hiss, the queen lunged, her tentacles lashing out like whips. Jack shoved Lixia and Neria behind him, meeting the onslaught with his blade. He hacked and slashed, black ichor spraying with every strike, but the queen was relentless, her tentacles seeming to come from every direction at once. One slammed into Jack's chest, sending him flying back into the altar. He felt the eggs beneath him shatter, their foul contents splattering across his skin. Lixia screamed his name, rushing to his side. But the queen was there, looming over them, her maws dripping with hunger. "Your struggle is pointless," she hissed. "My children will rise and your world will fall, as it was always meant to be." Jack's vision was going gray at the edges, his body battered and broken. But through the pain, through the despair, a sudden clarity struck him. The eggs, the spawn, they were all connected to the queen, drawing strength from her. If she fell, with a roar of defiance, Jack surged to his feet. Ignoring the agony that lanced through him, he leapt at the queen, his blade aimed true. The sword sank into her chest, piercing through to the blackened heart beneath. The queen shrieked, her tentacles flailing, but Jack held fast, twisting the blade, pouring every ounce of his strength and will into the strike. And then, with a final gurgling cry, the queen shuddered and went still. Her tentacles drooped, her many eyes going dark. Around them, the eggs began to wither, shriveling in on themselves like rotten fruit. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, the temple seeming to brighten. It was over. They had won. Jack sagged, the sword slipping from his grasp. He would have fallen, but Lixia and Neria were there, catching him, supporting him. "You did it," Lixia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us all." Jack managed a weak smile. "We did it," he corrected. "Together." Neria pressed a fierce kiss to his lips. "Let's go home," she murmured. "All of us." And so, battered but unbroken, the trio made their way out of the temple, back to the light, back to life. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their bond forged in the fires of adversity. As they sailed back across calmer seas, the sun warm on their faces, Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one, for they had found something worth fighting for, something worth living for in each other. And that was a treasure greater than any legend could hold. Jack stood on the beach, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The gentle waves lapped at his feet, the cool water a soothing balm after a long day of fishing and tending to the small garden he and the sisters had started. It had been several months since their harrowing journey to the Temple of the Deep, since their hard-won victory over the Kraken Queen. In that time, they had settled into a comfortable routine on Jack's Island, their days filled with simple, peaceful tasks and their nights with passion and companionship. Jack had never known such contentment, such a sense of belonging. With Lixia and Neria, he had found a home, a family. The hole in his heart, the one left by years of war and loss, had finally begun to heal. As if summoned by his thoughts, slender arms wrapped around his waist from behind. He smiled, leaning back into the embrace. "Dinner's almost ready," Neria murmured, her breath warm against his ear. "Lixia's trying her hand at that fish stew recipe you showed us." Jack chuckled. "Brave of her. Last time I tried to teach her to cook, we nearly set the hut on fire." Neria giggled, the sound like music. "She's determined. You know how she gets when she sets her mind to something." I do indeed," Jack said, turning in Neria's arms to face her. He drank in the sight of her, the way the fading light played across her sky-blue skin, the mischievous sparkle in her sapphire eyes. "Reminds me of someone else I know." He leaned down, capturing her lips in a tender kiss. Neria sighed into it, her body molding to his. No matter how many times he held her, kissed her, Jack never tired of it, never stopped marveling at the miracle of her, of them. A pointed cough broke them apart. They turned to see Lixia standing a few feet away, hands on her hips and a smirk on her face. "If you two are quite finished," she said, her tone teasing, "dinner is served." Jack grinned, stepping back from Neria but keeping an arm around her waist. "Lead the way, my lady." Lixia rolled her eyes, but her smile was fond as she turned and headed back toward the hut. Jack and Neria followed, their hands intertwined. Yes, Jack thought, this was paradise, and nothing could ruin it. He should have known better than to tempt fate. They were just sitting down to their meal when a commotion sounded from outside, shouts and cries that had all three of them leaping to their feet. Jack was first to the door, yanking it open to reveal a scene of chaos. Villagers ran past, their faces stricken with fear. In the distance, smoke rose from the direction of the village proper, the acrid scent carrying on the wind. "What's happening?" Neria cried, her hand finding Jack's. "I don't know," he said grimly, "but we're going to find out." They raced toward the village center, Jack's heart pounding in his chest. Had the Kraken returned? Some new spawn risen from the depths to terrorize the people once more? But as they reached the square, Jack pulled up short, his eyes widening at the sight before him. No Kraken, no monsters, just a man, tall and broad with skin the same sky blue as the sisters. He stood in the center of the square, a sword in his hand and a sneer on his face as he surveyed the cowering villagers. "Where are they?" he demanded, his voice cold. "Where are my sisters?" Jack felt Lixia and Neria stiffen beside him, heard their sharp intake of breath. "Neptarian," Lixia whispered, her voice trembling. "But it can't be. He was banished, cast out." The man's head snapped around at the sound of his name, his gaze locking onto the sisters. A cruel smile curved his lips. "Ah, there you are," he purred. "My dear sweet sisters. How I've missed you." He stalked forward, the crowd parting before him like water. Jack stepped in front of Lixia and Neria, his hand going to the knife at his belt. "That's close enough," he said, his voice hard. "Who are you?" Neptarian paused, his eyes flicking to Jack. "Ah, the human," he sneered. "I've heard about you. The great hero, the Kraken Slayer, the one who stole my sisters' hearts." "He didn't steal anything," Neria snapped, stepping out from behind Jack. Her sapphire eyes flashed with anger. "We gave our hearts freely." "Freely?" Neptarian scoffed. "You're barely more than children, dazzled by a pretty face and a few flashy heroics. You don't know what's best for you." "And you do?" Lixia demanded, joining her sister. "You who were banished for your cruelty, your tyranny, you have no say in our lives, not anymore." Neptarian's face twisted with rage. "I am your brother," he roared. "Your blood, and I will not see our family's legacy tainted by this landwalker." He spat the word like a curse, his sword coming up to point at Jack's chest. Jack's grip tightened on his knife, his body coiling with tension. He had faced down monsters, nightmares made flesh. But this, a threat to his family, to his heart, it awakened a fury in him unlike any he had known. "Legacy?" he growled. "What legacy is that? One of fear? Of oppression? From where I stand, your sisters are the best thing to ever happen to this village. They're kind and brave and good. Everything you're not," Neptarian snarled, his sword flashing as he lunged forward. But Jack was ready, meeting the blade with his own. Steel clashed against steel, the sound ringing through the square. They traded blows, parrying and thrusting, dancing a deadly waltz. Neptarian was skilled, his movements quick and precise, but Jack had a lifetime of battle experience and the fierce determination of a man fighting for everything he held dear. With a final, powerful strike, Jack sent Neptarian's sword flying from his hand. It clattered to the ground, leaving the blue-skinned man defenseless. Jack pressed the point of his knife to Neptarian's throat, his chest heaving. "Yield," he commanded. "It's over." But Neptarian only laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Over," he spat. "Foolish human, this is only the beginning." His hands shot out, quick as a snake, and closed around a pendant hanging from his neck. Before Jack could react, Neptarian yanked the pendant free. A blinding flash of light erupted from the shattered amulet, engulfing Neptarian. Jack staggered back, shielding his eyes. When the glare faded, he lowered his hand and felt his blood turn to ice. Where Neptarian had stood, a monster now loomed, towering and grotesque, with mottled blue-gray skin and writhing tentacles. Its face was a nightmare, all bulging eyes and gaping, tooth-filled maws. "Behold!" the creature roared, its voice a distorted echo of Neptarian. "The true power of our lineage, the blessing of the Deep Ones." Jack heard Lixia and Neria cry out in horror, felt the villagers shrink back in terror. But he stood his ground, raising his knife once more. "I don't care what you are," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "or what dark powers you serve. You threaten my family, my home, and I will not let that stand." The Neptarian creature laughed, a sound like the grinding of stones. "You think you can stop me, landwalker? I am a god!" It lashed out with its tentacles, the appendages whipping through the air like scourges. Jack dodged and weaved, hacking at the flailing limbs with his blade. Black ichor sprayed, sizzling where it touched his skin. But for every tentacle he severed, two more seemed to take its place. They slammed into him, sending him crashing to the ground. His knife skittered away, just out of reach. The creature loomed over him, its fetid breath washing over his face. "Pathetic," it hissed. "To think my sisters chose you over their own blood." It raised a massive clawed hand, poised to strike. Jack braced himself for the killing blow, but it never came. A blur of blue slammed into the creature's side, sending it staggering. Lixia, her face set with determination, pressed her attack, a spear clutched in her hands. Beside her, Neria wielded a trident, the prongs gleaming wickedly. Together, the sisters drove the creature back, their weapons finding gaps in its defenses, drawing gouts of black blood. They moved in perfect sync, a deadly dance honed by a lifetime of fighting side by side. Jack struggled to his feet, snatching up his fallen knife. He leapt back into the fray, adding his own strikes to the sisters' onslaught. The creature roared in pain and fury, its tentacles flailing wildly. But it was weakening, its movements growing sluggish, its attacks more desperate. With a final, coordinated strike, the three of them brought the beast to its knees. Jack stepped forward, his knife poised over its pulsing heart. "This is for threatening my family," he snarled, and plunged the blade deep. The creature let out a shriek that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Then it shuddered and collapsed, its body dissolving into a puddle of foul-smelling ichor. Silence fell over the square, broken only by the ragged breathing of the victors. Then, slowly, a cheer began to build. The villagers surged forward, surrounding Jack and the sisters, their faces alight with joy and gratitude. "You saved us," they cried. "Again! Hail the heroes!" others shouted. "Hail the Kraken slayers!" Jack found himself engulfed in a sea of embraces, of hands clapping his back and ruffling his hair. But his eyes sought only two faces in the crowd, Lixia and Neria, his loves, his heart. They beamed at him, their eyes shining with pride and adoration. He pulled them close, crushing them against his chest. "I love you," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you, so much." "And we love you," Lixia whispered, her hand cupping his cheek. "Always," Neria added, pressing a kiss to his jaw. There, amidst the cheering crowd, their hearts full to bursting, Jack knew he had found his place, his purpose, and he would fight to his last breath to protect it, to nurture it. For this was worth living for, worth dying for. This was home. The sun was setting over the tranquil waters surrounding Jack's island, painting the sky in a breathtaking array of oranges, pinks, and purples. On the beach, Jack sat with Lixia and Neria, the two beautiful alien women he had come to love more than life itself. It had been a long, hard road to get to this moment of peace. After defeating Neptarion and his monstrous form in the village square, they had uncovered a terrifying truth. The Deep Ones, the ancient undersea entities that had created the Kraken, had been infiltrating the village for years, corrupting the hearts and minds of the people. What followed was a desperate, harrowing struggle. Jack and the sisters, aided by a handful of loyal villagers, had fought to root out the cultists, to sever their connection to the dark powers below the waves. They had faced monsters, both physical and psychological, each more terrifying than the last. There had been moments when Jack had almost lost hope, when the darkness had seemed too deep, the odds too overwhelming. But Lixia and Neria had been his light, his strength. Their love, their unwavering faith in him, had kept him going even in the bleakest of times. And in the end, they had triumphed. The Deep One's hold on the village had been broken, their cultists driven into the sea. Chief Neptar, though not a cultist himself, had stepped down from his position, the revelation of his own father's involvement with the Deep Ones too much for him to bear. In his place, the villagers had chosen a new leader, Lixia. Jack's heart had nearly burst with pride as he watched her accept the mantle, her sapphire eyes shining with determination and wisdom far beyond her years. Neria, ever the adventurer, had taken on the role of the village's emissary, forging alliances and trade agreements with the other settlements scattered across the vast oceans of Aquarius 6. And Jack had finally found his place, his purpose. He was the village's protector, their champion, the human who had saved them, not once, but 3 times over, the man who had won the hearts of their most beloved daughters. It hadn't been an easy adjustment. There were still those who looked at him with suspicion, who whispered that he didn't belong. that he would never truly be one of them. But Jack paid them no mind. He knew where he belonged, who he belonged with. Lixia's hands slipped into his, her slender blue fingers intertwining with his calloused tan ones. "What are you thinking about, my love?" she murmured, her head resting on his shoulder. Jack smiled, pressing a kiss to her silky sapphire hair. "Just everything," he said. "All that we've been through. All that we've overcome." On his other side, Neria laughed, the sound like the tinkling of wind chimes. "We have had quite the adventure, haven't we?" she said, her hand finding Jack's other one. "That we have," Jack agreed, his thumb rubbing circles on her smooth blue skin. "But you know what the best part is?" "What?" the sisters asked in unison, their voices filled with curiosity. Jack's grin widened. "It's not over yet." He released their hands and stood, pulling them up with him. They came easily, their lithe bodies pressing against his, their eyes sparkling with anticipation. "In fact," Jack continued, his voice dropping to a husky whisper, "I think our greatest adventure is just beginning." With that, he swept Lixia up into his arms, eliciting a delighted squeal from the normally poised and regal woman. Neria laughed, clapping her hands in glee as Jack spun her sister around, peppering her face with kisses. "Jack," Lixia giggled, her arms wrapping around his neck. "What's gotten into you?" "What's gotten into me?" Jack repeated, his blue eyes dancing with mischief. "Why, love, of course. Love for you, for Neria, for this life we've built together." He set Lixia down gently, then reached for Neria, pulling her close. "I wake up every morning amazed that this is real," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "That I get to be here with you both. That I get to call you mine." Neria's hands came up to frame his face, her sapphire eyes shimmering with emotion. "And we are yours," she whispered, "just as you are ours, now and forever." Their lips met, a sweet, tender kiss that held the promise of forever. Lixia's arms encircled them both, her own lips finding the sensitive spot on Jack's neck that never failed to make him shiver. They sank down to the soft sand, limbs tangling, hands exploring. They made love there on the beach, the crashing waves and the crying gulls the only witnesses to their passion, their devotion. Afterwards, they lay in a contented heap, watching the stars blink to life in the darkening sky. Jack had never been one for religion, for belief in a higher power. But lying there with Lixia and Neria in his arms, he couldn't help but feel that some benevolent force had led him here, to this moment, to these women. "I love you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you, more than I ever thought possible." "And we love you," Lixia murmured, her hand resting over his heart. "Our brave, kind, wonderful human." "Our mate," Neria added, her leg thrown possessively over his. "Our partner in all things." Jack felt his heart swell, felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had come to this planet seeking solace, seeking an escape from the horrors of his past. And he had found so much more. He had found love, true and pure and all-encompassing. He had found a home, not just a place, but a feeling, a sense of belonging that he had never known before. And he had found a future, bright and shining and full of promise. As they drifted off to sleep there on the beach, their bodies intertwined, their hearts beating as one, Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever storms they might face, they would weather them together. For they were bound not just by love, but by something deeper, something unbreakable. They were family, now and always, and that was the greatest adventure of all. Years passed, as years are wont to do. The village prospered under Lixia's wise leadership, growing into a thriving hub of trade and culture. Neria's diplomatic skills brought peace and cooperation with their neighbors, ushering in an era of unprecedented harmony. And Jack became a legend. The tales of his heroism, of his unbreakable spirit and unwavering loyalty spread far and wide, inspiring generations of young warriors and adventurers. But to Lixia and Neria, he was simply their Jack, their lover, their partner, the father of their children. For in time their family grew, little ones with tan skin and sapphire hair, with their mother's grace and their father's courage. They raised them on the island, in the little hut that had once been Jack's lonely refuge, and was now a home filled with laughter and love. They taught them the ways of the land and the sea, the importance of kindness and compassion, of standing up for what was right. And when the children were grown, when they set out to find their own adventures, their own paths in life, Jack and his loves would sit on the beach hand in hand, watching the sun set over the tranquil waters. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" Lixia would say, her head on Jack's shoulder. "The best," Neria would agree, her hand in his. And Jack, his hair now silver, his face lined with the years, would smile, his heart full to bursting. "And it's not over yet," he would say, just as he had all those years ago. "Our adventure continues, my loves. Always." And it did. Through the years, through the changes, through all the joys and sorrows that life could bring, their love, their bond, remained constant, a shining beacon guiding them home. For that is the true magic of love, the real power of the human spirit. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to unite, to heal, to make whole that which was broken. Jack had come to Aquarius 6 a shattered man, a soldier without a war, a soul without a purpose. And he had found everything he never knew he needed, everything he never knew he wanted. He had found his soulmates, his true loves. He had found his place in the universe. And in doing so, he had found himself.